Well, welcome everybody. I'm Julia Goodman. I'm very happy to be able to welcome our guests for the seminar today. Just as way of introduction, I think as a lot of you know, we recently moved our seminars from in-person to online. And of course, we miss getting to see people in person on Wednesdays, but the great benefit of that is that it allows us to move these seminars to have an opportunity to welcome speakers from near and far. And so today, I should say this evening for our guests, we're very excited to be welcoming guests all the way from Norway, who I think are at this point our furthest guests who have come and presented at the seminar, at least in my time. So I was very fortunate to get to go to Norway to visit Tanja and Wendy this spring, and very happy to be able to welcome them now, at least virtually, to our Oregon Institute of Occupational Health Sciences. So Tanja Nordberg is a senior researcher at the Work Research Institute at Oslo Metropolitan University, or Oslo Met. Her background is in criminology and sociology, and she has expertise in qualitative methods. Her research focuses on work time, employee rights, gender equality, flexible work arrangements, connectivity, and work-family boundaries. Wendy Nilsen is a senior researcher also at the Work Research Institute at Oslo Met. Her background is in psychology using a quantitative approach, and her research interests are around intersections of work, family, and health and well-being. And in particular, she focuses on how flexible working arrangements and digital connectivity affect employees and their families. So a very warm welcome to Tanja and Wendy. Thank you for joining us at 9 o'clock in the evening, Norway time. And we're very happy to have you here. So I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah. Skal I begynne? Yeah, okay. So first of all, it's a great pleasure to have been invited to present our research here today. And as Julia said, we're Wendy and Tanja, and work at the Work Research Institute in Oslo Met in Oslo. And our institute is very interdisciplinary, and we work on many different topics, including work flexibility, which we will talk about today. So our presentation is about the part of the labor force that are able to connect to work outside their workplace. And typically these are knowledge workers, office workers, but also others who can take their job home occasionally, such as teachers or social workers, which is a part of our sample, amongst others. And we also acknowledge that not all employees have equal access to flexible or remote work arrangements, and that this also can contribute to some social and occupational inequalities. But today's presentation will focus specifically on the group of employees who do have such opportunities, in order to examine how flexibility is experienced and managed in practice. So as you know, people are increasingly connected to work both outside the workplace and outside regular working hours. And concerns about this has led several countries to introduce the right to disconnect, which you probably have heard about. And this includes countries such as France, Ireland, Spain, and most recently also Australia last year. And the right to disconnect is about giving employees a legal or contractual right not to be available to their employer outside working hours. And in other words, it's the right to not have to respond to work-related emails, phone calls, or messages outside your work time. And we'll also say a little bit more about this right and evaluations of it towards the end of the presentation. But we would like you to start thinking about whether you believe this is something that should be regulated and how it should be regulated. So I will talk a little bit about the projects that we have on this topic. So me and Tanja lead several projects related to flexibility in the workplace. We have a project about technology use across work and home called Flexit. And here we focus on boundary crossing, both using digital devices to do work in the home domain, but also using digital devices to do private matters in the work domain. And here we have done a scoping review and a bibliometry of the work of the literature. And Tanja has conducted in-depth interviews with professionals with children. And we have also collected longitudinal data last year, where we followed about 1,000 employees for 4 waves over 6 months. And currently we are in the final process of this project where we are collecting data for diary study of employees responding to short surveys in the morning and in the evening. And here we're going to examine to which degree after hours work in the evening is related to next morning recovery states and readiness to work through positive and negative rumination. And we're also going to hold some initial workshops in some organizations to discuss which guidelines for working flexible might be feasible for employers and employees. And secondly, when the pandemic arrived, we were already working on this topic, and we started discussing how these work-family boundaries were affected by the pandemic, and thought it was essential to raise more awareness of this in Norway. So first we were invited to have presentations here and there for different organizations, and we wrote some opinion pieces in the Norwegian media. And then we applied for and were lucky to get a long funding for a telework project, the Crossbow project, where we also we are about 12 different researchers with different fields and from different methods. So similar to Flexit, we also have a mixed method approach here with interviews with managers and employees in 5 organizations, where there are cases because they have different remote work practices. And also we are very lucky to have some union researchers at our institute. So they have interviewed union and safety representatives in these 5 organizational cases. And also we have had a longitudinal survey with following 2,000 employees across 4 waves and 2 years time. And finally, we have the Reflex project, which is our newest project, which focuses on the blend between working time flexibility and work inclusion. And this is a collaborative project where we are collaborating with 4 schools to conduct participatory interventions. And here we have interviewed both teachers and school leaders, conducted longitudinal surveys, which also will be used as pre and post tests of the interventions that we are conducting. And we have conducted a rapid review, which we will tell about later in this presentation. And we're also currently conducting several vignette surveys to examine penalties for disconnecting or working flexible, like how people are viewed when working flexible or not working flexible. And the reason why I wanted to we wanted to share this is that we are very happy to share the data or collaborate on this data if you have any research questions that might be examined using them. For instance, particularly for the quantitative longitudinal studies, there are a lot of different variables, and the participants have been so good to answer all these waves. And there is a lot of research questions that we are not able to examine ourselves. So if anyone have any interest or time, just send us a mail afterwards. And for the qualitative interviews also, if some of you have something that aligns with this, we're also happy to do some collaborative things around this. And today we will talk about how and why employees use flexibility and what the consequences are. And we will raise the question if work is always work, and how norms might play a role in flexible work. And finally, we will say something about what should be done next. And we will draw upon data from these projects and these data sets, both published and unpublished findings. Yeah, so then to Tanja.
Yeah, so how do we use flexibility? In Norway, among employees who can work from home, 50% work outside regular hours at least weekly, either from home or other locations. And this applies to employees in both the private and the public sectors. We have looked at 2 types of intensive work outside regular working hours, where we asked employees whether they use their smartphone or tablet intensively outside working hours for work-related tasks, and also whether they check work-related emails up until they go to bed. As many as 40% report that they use their mobile phone intensively for work outside regular hours, and 43% say they check work emails right up until bedtime. And although Norway is known to have more regulated working life and family-friendly policies, we see that this mirrors international findings, showing that people are increasingly connected to work, both outside the workplace and outside regular working hours. And more than half of the Norwegian labor force can work outside the workplace now, and this is an increase from around 30% before the pandemic. 88% of these report to check their work-related messages outside work hours, and about 1 in 3 report to do this on a daily basis or more. And in the qualitative interviews, we also see that people work more after hours than they intend to do, and that they don't always manage to protect their family members from after hours work. And also many employees have stated that this is the work related communication, and that's what is most difficult for them to control. And the patterns of many people working outside regular working hours are reflected in the interviews we conducted. We see that workers in both the private and public sectors say that they work a lot outside normal working hours. And for instance, they told us about how they would use their phone to work next to their children bathing in the bathtub during weekends, or sending work messages while hiding their phone behind a cushion on the sofa, and also communicating with the workplace on mountaintops and cabin trips where they intended to socialize or relax. And both in the surveys and the interviews, and also in international studies, we see that work crosses boundaries and that work flows into leisure time and family time. And why do we do this? Workers see flexibility to work anytime, anywhere as a major advantage. And that's not very surprising. The fact that work-family borders become blurred is a price many workers are willing to pay, because they want to perform at a high level in their jobs without having to reduce their work hours, and then still being present with their families. And we see that employees across professions say that they would have to spend much more time in the office if they couldn't log on from home. So with flexibility, they can pick up children early, have dinner together, and take part in family activities, so that they're less physically present at work, but they're more digitally present at work later in the day. And I'll show you an example from the interviews. And this father says, "Sometimes I wonder how it would have been having these 3 children if we didn't have the flexibility we've had, both of us. That would have been difficult, but it does involve a lot of late nights."
Okay. So I will talk about the consequences of working outside regular hours. So working outside regular hours, whether it's long days or constant connectivity, can negatively affect employee health. And a lot of research, both internationally and we also see in our longitudinal Norwegian data, show that boundaryless work reduces opportunities for both detachment and recovery, which again increases job stress, work-home conflict, and burnout over time. So we have a PhD student, Christine, at our institute or at a project who looks explicitly at these detachment and recovery mechanisms. But we also see that effects are not uniform. Occasional extra work is usually not harmful. Having a presentation for people in the other side of the world at 9 p.m. might be okay, luckily, and outcomes vary by workplaces, employees, and life stages as well. And some of these findings already exist, and some is we're looking into doing it. And using our own data, we examined the link between 5 different working patterns. So we chose working patterns that actually are regulated by the Norwegian Working Environmental Act. And I think these are also patterns that they are also regulated in the EU and other countries as well. So the patterns were long day. I forgot to click. And the patterns that we examined were long daily working hours above 10 hours, quick returns, that you are back to work with less than 11 hours of restitution, and late evening work after 9, coincidentally, or maybe not, long weekly hours of 40 hours, and Sunday work. And we examined these different working patterns and employee health and well-being, which we measured with burnout, pain, detachment, and work-home conflict. So we conducted these with in-person analysis of 1,500 full-time employees that had access to working from home, which we also thought was interesting because these kind of regulated patterns have been examined in shift workers, like health workers or long distance drivers and other occupations before, but they have not been that much examined in office workers, which the consequences are not patient safety or injuries in the same sort. So we thought it was interesting to examine this in like a knowledge worker sample. So we found that all these patterns, when employees work more after hours with all these patterns, they also had higher adverse health and well-being outcomes. And we also examined how these patterns remained when adjusting for long weekly work hours and work autonomy, and all patterns remained. So we found links here between all these regulated patterns and all outcomes except pain. Yeah. So that was interesting. And it was also interesting that 1 in 4 and 1 in 5 workers partake in these patterns, even though it's not seen as very healthy. And also working outside of regular working hours can spill over to the family. About half of the employees we surveyed last year reported that the families think that they should limit work that take place outside of working hours. And 42% say that they get distracted by work-related communication when they are with family members. And 1 in 10 actually says that this happens quite often. And similarly, we see in the interviews that even when workers are physically present with their families, since they communicate with their work, they feel mentally absent. They are not really there, and that it is not always a conscious choice to work in the way they do. And as Tanja mentioned, they say that they hide from their children behind the cushion, and they generally express feelings of guilt. So based on the findings from these interviews, as well as finding that there is a gap of studies examining these topics, like family topics or technology-related guilt topics, we found that there was a lack of studies examining this when we did the scoping review. So we added these variables in our longitudinal survey. So I'll give you also, I'll also give a presentation tell you about the paper that we are working on currently here. So the study is about examining the link between after-hours connectivity and work, family, and guilt. So the underlying theoretical framework for this paper is border theory, which suggests that the work-family borders are flexible and permeable. So when employees work during their leisure time, a borderland occurs where time is no longer used exclusively on work or family. And this borderland, according to Clark, can cause work-family conflict. And findings do indeed find that after-hours work or communication is linked with work-to-family conflict. For instance, in a recent meta-analysis from 2023 or 2024 by Kühner and colleagues. I also find it very surprising that there's a lot of studies focusing on the link between after-hours work and work-family conflict, but very few examine what underlies this work-family conflict, particularly examining the mediation of family factors, or like how mechanisms can be from the family side. Second, we build on family systems theory, which views the family as an interconnected system. As such, work-related connectivity outside work is likely not only affect the employee, but also directly affect others and relationship to others that are in the home. And as such, we were wondering if bringing work home in an intensive manner would increase the tension and conflict in the family. And there are some indications from former studies that this is the case. And third, we build upon research done about technoference, which is a term that describes how technology used, for instance, work-related communication, interferes with or interrupts the interactions with others. And to measure this, we connected the technoference instrument with guilt. So we measured how distracted employees are by job-related communication when they are with their close family members, and how guilty they are about not being able to be present with their family members. And I think there's one item extra. So because when Tanja had these interviews and people were talking about guilt, we looked into the literature and found that there were not very much done about this in the quantitative literature. And those who had done it had used work-family conflict measures and just put it's a good measure, but it's too similar to the work-family conflict measures that we have because they have the same wordings. So we had to find something else that were more specific for our use. Yeah, and so very swiftly also there was a need for longitudinal studies, and there was a need to examine underlying family factors in the link between after-hours work and work-family conflict. So what we wanted to examine was to which degree is after-hours connectivity linked with technology-related guilt and work-family conflict. And second, we wanted to examine to which degree do technology-related guilt mediate the link between after-hours connectivity and work-life conflict. And also, this is a part of a paper that we're writing. So inside here, we also have partner attention, but I thought I would just isolate this for today to make it more simple. So we also wanted to examine the research question in two matters. First, we examined between person differences, thus group differences. So this is similar to what former studies have done in cross-sectional studies, for instance. It's basically difference between different groups. So we wanted to kind of see if we found the same patterns as other people. But we also wanted to examine within person differences where we could utilize the longitudinal design and basically examine what happens to employees' work-family conflict when they work more or less than their usual average. And this way we could go further than former studies on the topic in that we could adjust for unobservable traits that are similar across time, such as personality, for instance, or other stable things going on. And it's also, I just wanted to say that it's difficult to have these presentations when you don't see the audience, because maybe a lot of these things are things that you know, but I will just go through it anyway. So we used 4 data points collected between February and July 2024 from the Flexit study. And employees were invited from 3 organizations and social media here. And those responding to the first wave were invited to join for 3 subsequent waves. And for the current paper, we restricted the sample to employees working at least 75% and who live with a partner, since we also have partner attention here. And then that was 800 employees at the first wave, with response rates for the subsequent waves ranging from 47 to 60%. And the sample was mostly women, which we have when we recruit like this often. And the mean age was around 45 and around half were parents. And not surprisingly, it was a very high education level since everyone had the potential to work on their laptop or mobile phone, and most worked at least somewhat from home. And yeah, just quickly, we used mostly valid instruments to measure things here, like after-hours connectivity and work-family conflict, but also we adapted this technology-related guilt measure from former instruments and based on the interviews. Yeah, and it had like reasonable reliability. Yeah, and we did analyses with both between and within person effects and adjusted for like weekly work hours, job demands, general social media use, gender, age, type of sample, and if they had children and education. So to the more exciting part, what did we find? So first, for the between person analysis, employees with intensive after-hours connectivity patterns also had higher technology-related guilt, and they also had higher work-life conflict. And employees reporting higher technology-related guilt also had higher work-life conflict. And here we had a high level of explained variance between 20 to 30%. And then we examined if does technology-related guilt mediate the link between after-hours connectivity and work-life conflict. And we found that it did, and it accounted for more than a third of this link. But these were the between person levels. So we were wondering, could this just reflect stable trait differences? For instance, personality or specific response styles. So here are the within person analyses. So here the associations were slightly smaller, which are to be expected, but all effects remained significant, which means that when intensive after-hours connectivity increases in an individual, technology-related guilt and work-life conflict also increases. And when technology-related guilt increases in an individual, work-life conflict also increases compared to their average levels. And this mediation was also significant and accounted for 20%. But the explained variance was a bit lower, or much lower. So, and as a lot of studies, this person study have some methodological strengths, such as being a longitudinal study following people over time. And we had repeated and mostly validated measures. But on the flip side, we only had self-reports and not observational data, which would have been super if we had objective data on people's cell phone use for work or other types of work-related communication. And there are also some potential limitations with regard to the data collection. The 3 companies wanting to join were very different, and the response rates were small in some of the subsamples. With, I think, the response rates in the first wave, when we invited, ranged from 20 to 40%. So maybe those most affected by after-hours work wanted to join, for instance. But when we control for a range of different control variables, such as general technology use and other things, the findings hold. So the take-home message from this paper is that technology-related guilt when working whilst family members are present seem to be a relevant mediator for the link between after-hours communication and work-life conflict, both in the between-person and within-person analysis. And the study also highlighted the importance of considering family-related factors as underlying mechanisms. And what I didn't say was that partner tension also is also a relevant mediator here. And so a message is also to remember to disconnect from work when you are with your closed ones. But as Tanja is going to show you, this might be difficult because it's not always so easy due to how we look at work.
Yeah. So we find that work is not always perceived as work, or is not always experienced as actual work. So there's a need to nuance and awareness of which type of connectivity to work has negative effects. Okay. Yeah. And we've written about when work is not work in an article about patterns and perceptions of work and time, which is currently under review. In our interviews, we find 2 distinct patterns of working outside regular working hours. First, you have the picking up and the laptop and working in a focused session in a defined work period, versus the constant checking and staying continuously connected to work. And we see that these always-on patterns of work are often not considered to be real work. And to get the more nuanced pictures of after-hour work, we distinguish between these 2 patterns in our survey. And then we found that 2/3 of participants report that they work a session outside working hours at least weekly. And an even larger share, almost 90%, will check work-related emails outside working hours, with 1/3 doing so multiple times a day. And this may seem obvious, but research doesn't always account for the differences. When we did a scoping review of ICT use across work and family, we saw that surveys often only ask about working outside regular hours in general. And also regulations rarely distinguish between these types of work, but it does matter. And we see that continuous connectivity or communication, or what some call light work, is often not planned. People are not conscious about it, and they don't consider it actual work. And because it's not perceived as real work, employees don't protect those around them from this type of work in the way they would during structured work sessions. Maybe they take their laptop and go to a different room and do a work session. Whereas, quickly checking and answering messages as you go along, they don't reflect on that. So in this paper, we use qualitative interview data from 55 participants. And the aim was to analyze how working parents experience time when they work from home in these different temporal patterns. And our emphasis is on mobile communication and what that and so-called light work means for how they experience time. And we found that some work-related activities were not seen as work, but rather as relations. For example, teachers would go the extra mile for their students, and other professions would do the same for colleagues. One teacher, she compared responding to messages from students to meeting them at the grocery store, where it will feel completely natural to say hello and have a short chat. And the teacher emphasized that this is not work, but is part of their relationships. But then when work communication is perceived as relations, it becomes harder to set boundaries. Especially now in the grocery stores, it's become teams, and you can be contacted at any time and place by your work network. And when work is viewed in this way as relations or as not real work, there's a greater risk that work seeps into personal time without workers noticing it or reflecting upon it. And the key findings in this paper are related to porous time, and that digital connectivity, not just off-hours work, blurs work-family boundaries. And we see that light work, which is brief, relational, and often invisible interactions, leads to digital presentism and unconscious work. And this means that some work time is not perceived at work time, and this always on work patterns from home results in porous time, where work and family time merges and overlaps. And they experience that they both gain time and lose time. They lose time because work creeps into the family sphere, so family time is reduced, but you haven't really increased work time. And it's also time gained because bringing work home facilitates togetherness and co-presence at the same time as you can fulfill professional obligations and have family interactions. So, porous time enables the combination of work and involved parenthood, but also increases expectations of responsiveness and creates ambiguity about what counts as work. And this challenges quantitative measures of after-hour connectivity, and it also complicates initiatives such as the right to disconnect. And now let's talk about norms. In both our interviews and survey data, we see that working outside regular hours can increase the pressure to be digitally available to others. More than 1/3 feel pressure to respond to work-related messages outside working hours. And in the interviews, employees describe how they receive emails at all hours, especially from colleagues with young children. And there can be consequences for logging off. These numbers are from a survey among teachers. I'm not sure how this is in the US, but in Norway, teachers are a group which is increasingly available for pupils, parents, and colleagues after hours. And here you can see the share of who completely or partly agree with various statements. The top section concerns expectations they have of themselves. For example, 76% say it's not enough to work within contracted hours to do a good job. 60% say they remain available so as not to disappoint work contacts. And 51% say it's not possible to practice the teaching profession if you have to log off in your free time. And we see this as related to job demands. And underneath, you see expectations from others. 72% say that their colleagues regularly send and answer messages outside working hours. And you can see that it's mainly pupils and parents who expect a response, and also they are the ones to comment if you don't reply. And very few reported that their managers showed dissatisfaction if they're not available after hours. And these numbers resonate with what we find in the interviews. Many teachers go to great lengths for their pupils. It's not because the school asks them to do so, but because they want to be a good teacher. And so how are these availability expectations enacted in practice? In the interviews, we see that logging off can sometimes lead to sanctions, even if no one intends it. This teacher says, there are messages on Teams all the time. Then you almost never have time off work. So now I've deleted Teams from my phone, and that may mean I miss out on things my colleague discuss during evenings or weekends. The managers often work on Sundays to catch up on things and be prepared for the next week. And then he just sends a message on Teams and he says he doesn't expect a response. But when one person responds to the message, the discussion starts, right? If you don't respond immediately, that discussion is over before you start work on Monday. So the manager says, no, it's not an expectation. No, it's not, but in practice it is. Because if you're not logged on, you don't get to participate in the conversation. Then things are decided without you having the chance to take part, even if you would have wanted to have a say. And in this example, the leader actually explicitly says that no one is expected to respond after hours. But still, the behavior of others, implicit norms and expectations of being available, can create unintended sanctions for those who disconnect. And these sanctions may not be felt equally. Those who have to be online in the weekends or evenings, offline, did I say online? For example, parents of young children or employees with caregiving responsibilities, those with health challenges, they may risk reduced career opportunities or feel disadvantaged. And we find similar availability norms come into play when it comes to remote work, including implicit expectations about what you should do when you're sick. Several employees talk about how they continue working, but from home while they're sick or while their children are sick, and that they need to be bedridden not to work. And this appears to have increased as remote work has become more widespread.
Can we just add that this citation is also from a paper about like workability and the positive effects of remote work as well.
Yeah.
Like how people who have health issues or care responsibility, that how remote work also helps them being able to work more and stay more attached to work in 100% position. And then this citation is also the flip side of what happens with the boundaries between illness and like being at work when you're ill.
Yeah. Thanks. Yeah. And in Reflex, we're currently examining these implicit norms more closely. And Wendy's going to present some preliminary findings from this ongoing work.
So we're currently working on a series of online survey experiments. And here we examine how how managers and colleagues evaluate their workers and coworkers who disconnect after hours, and also who work hybrid. And we will do one study examining disconnection and hybrid penalties in the UK and Norway. And this one is the one I will present to you, the preliminary findings from, very shortly. And further, we will next week send out a survey to the UK, Norway, France, and Australia, to 4,000 workers to examine disconnection penalties or premiums towards coworkers who disconnect or stay connected. And we are so lucky that Julia also is a part of this study that we will do start next week. And in the survey experiment I'm going to talk to you about now, participants are randomly assigned to read short vignette studies about the employee who varies on different dimensions. So the employee will vary on how much they work from home. And we have tried to make it this work from home about working hybrid, so 2 to 3 days a week, and also versus being mostly on site. We also examine how connected they are outside working hours, where I think the conditions are being mostly available, both for non-hasty messages and hasty messages or emergencies, and then not being available, but answering emergency messages or in some special occasions. And also we vary whether they are a parent or child-free, and also whether they are a woman or a man. And afterwards, the managers who participate rate this person on promotability, collegiality, competence, and work engagement. And maybe one more, time management. Yeah, and then we have sent this survey out to 1,017 managers in Norway before the summer and after, so in June and August. And the same thing is also being done in the UK. So we're also going to compare the data across countries here. So what we find is that managers systematically favor employees who work mostly on site and who remain digitally present after hours, which is in line with our hypothesis. And employees who work hybrid or are disconnected were rated as less engaged, less productive, less collegial, and less promotable. And the highest effect for hybrid work was for collegiality, which maybe is not very surprising, but we thought that it's interesting because some studies have examined just teleworkers against non-teleworkers, but here's like a balance. They are at work also. They're a part of the workplace half of the week. And here the penalty was 17%. So hybrid workers were rated 17% lower than on-site workers on collegiality and 10% lower on the other examined variables. And the highest effect for disconnection was for work engagement, where disconnected workers were rated 17% lower than connected workers. So when we started doing this study, we didn't know about other studies, but of course, or like it's also nice that other people are doing the same, but there was one study done this summer where somebody examined this, the detachment paradox, that how managers seem to want people to detach from work, but they also penalize them for being detached after work or disconnected or not answering. So it's like very interesting that we also find the same in Norway, where you might think that managers are less, they're more work family friendly, maybe. And together these findings here underscore a double penalty. Resisting digital presentism and reducing physical presence at work both lead to the lowest evaluations from managers. So we find that the managers' evaluations are thus shaped by some implicit biases tied to digital and physical presence. Yeah, and what was fun was that when the survey company did a mistake and sent out this survey to managers with the debriefing in the beginning, there was no effect whatsoever in the 100 managers that got the wrong survey. So they all said in the comment field that they did not want to de-evaluate people based on these things, because that would not be a good thing to do. But when they got the debrief later in the end of the survey for a new sample that the survey company had to go and find somewhere else, we found these implicit biases. And so what we find is that employees who set boundaries by not being present after hours or by adopting hybrid arrangements, they risk de-evaluation on dimensions that are critical for career advancement and the perceptions of their commitment and how sociable or collegial they are. So thus the flexibility practices that are meant to support work-life balance may also expose employees to penalties, which reinforce like this digital presentism thing. And then further, we're going to write up this paper and also conduct the survey experiment for employees in different countries. So what should be done or what can be done next? So since after-hours availability and connectivity had adverse consequences, we're wondering about what kind of effective interventions and policies actually exist, what have been researched and what has been proven to be effective. So we started doing a rapid review since we were going to discuss with participants in focus groups what they want to do in their workplace. We thought we should know what has actually been done and evaluated before. So we have done this rapid review, which is currently in review. So the research question is, are there any effective interventions and policies designed to limit availability expectations and after hours work connectivity? So we did a systematic search, and after screening around 2,000 or 3,000 studies, 12 studies were included. So what we found was that there was only one national right to disconnect study that evaluated the right to disconnect in France, but the study had low quality. but it reported that there were little observable impact. People were happy to have it, but managers at workplaces were not implementing it. Nothing was being done. So maybe something has been done later, because this was in 2018, maybe. Yeah. And then also the organizational disconnection. When people evaluated, there were 2 studies evaluating organizational disconnection guidelines. And here the effect seemed to depend on implementation or the person environmental fit, that it would only be beneficial for those people who kind of accepted the guideline. But these studies were not RCT studies, they were correlational studies. And also there was one study targeting supervisors with trainings about clearing after hours availability expectations. So this study showed that there was an improvement of the clarity of expectations, but it did not change the health and well-being outcomes measured, which might be because it was a brief, very small intervention. They only it didn't go for a long time. And then there were some employee-focused programs that were multi-component, focusing on boundary management training and also having mindfulness things. But also like maybe in one of the studies, like 1 of 4 elements was about getting micromanagement or tactics to not be attached to work after hours. And these seem to prove small but consistent improvements in outcomes such as detachment from work, boundary control, and work-life balance. But there were few studies that explicitly targeted after hours availability expectations or connectivity. And there were few studies that had that as their outcomes as well. So it seemed to be something that needs to be done. And also maybe typical in organizational psychology or fields in general, there are often individual focused programs like this is a problem, so then we should have mindfulness or yoga practices, and people should do something themselves without putting into other organizational structures or levels. Oh, no, I talked too much. Maybe, yeah. So this rapid review shows that the evidence base is small, heterogeneous, and there's a lot of limitations with methods, and that policies alone might not be enough, and that meaningful reductions in after-hours connectivity should require active organizational implementation, norm change, and supervisory involvement. Like future interventions must be multi-level and also aligned with boundary preferences, because like in Reflex, so we started a Reflex project because of the tension between flexible arrangements being good or like needed for some groups of people, but also there needed to be some protection for the negative adverse consequences that can come from overwork. Yeah. So yeah, we were a bit disappointed that there have not been done more interventions on this field, but it seems like more is done as we speak. So there are more studies popping up already. Yeah. So then, thank you.
Thank you so much. I know it's weird to finish presenting online and not get to hear the applause. 25 people who are here enjoying this talk. So we can open it up for questions and comments. I see one comment already that Leslie has put in the chat, just saying that she loves the concepts that you introduced around light work and porous work. And maybe as folks are, well, one reminder, as it says in the chat, if you do, you can either put your questions in the chat and I can read them out, or if you want to speak, you can ask Justin to individually unmute you. And as folks are coming up with their questions, I had a question that is a kind of an extension of Leslie's comment around these different kinds of, like, the different kinds of connectivity after hours. And I know there's been so much emphasis in light of the pandemic around working outside of, on different hours, working from home. These issues have come up for a lot of different kinds of workers, but clearly this has been going on for a lot longer. You've been studying connectivity since before the pandemic. But are there different kinds of connectivity issues that have gotten worse as a result of the pandemic, or are you seeing it sort of in all these different kind of in the intensive work, the always on Are there any differences in terms of how the pandemic has impacted connectivity?
I mean, we interviewed teachers, which, I mean, in Norway they are known for having a lack of work-life balance, and we also interviewed lawyers, which are known for, you know, always on availability. But what was interesting with the teachers was that after the lockdown periods, they experienced a change in how they were contacted after hours, and especially the introduction of Teams and other digital platforms, which lower the threshold for contacting. So that, yeah, before you would ring, you do that very seldom, then it's the emails, but the Teams messages were just, there's no boundaries for what they can be contacted about, and that's continued. Yeah.
I don't have any stats on it, so I haven't seen. I actually haven't examined it.
No, because we didn't do any surveys.
We didn't do any surveys after, but we could find surveys to examine it. It's a good question, because I think it will be like you say, in the teacher's profession, those who kind of got emerged into working like that suddenly, then they have now more tools, and then for some maybe it would go back to normal, and for some it would continue.
Okay, thank you. I see a couple of hands raised. Leslie?
Okay. Wendy and Tanja, thank you so very much. And I apologize that you can't see us, because I know that I have a problem when I present and I can't see people. So I know I'm now talking to you, but I'm actually here. It's a little bit odd. But your presentation was super interesting, and the whole line of research is so needed. I mean, as I mentioned earlier, and Julia read, I mean, you're introducing new concepts, you're studying issues that are really just starting to emerge. And I think that the whole piece about the double penalty that you mentioned, so people who are trying to actually abide by the law and not connect after hours, and also people, and if they're also the people who are working remotely, seem to be in, the kind of in the worst situation. And so that to me is a point where, and because I all of my work focuses on supervisor training, where you could really, really hone in on the supervisor training. And that's what I would recommend as kind of a next step. I mean, and I think that your review clearly shows that there's so much needed in this area. But there was a lot to digest here, and just very, very impressive. So I very much appreciate you're taking the time, and you're taking the time off of your work hours to present to us. So I really do appreciate it. I look forward to seeing how this moves forward, how your work moves forward.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We also were thinking about looking into like a next paper for the survey vignettes with the managers. We're looking into what kind of traits among the managers would affect their evaluations of others. So when we look at their own connectivity use, it seems like the managers who are most connected themselves have higher penalties than others. And some managers actually explicitly say that it's okay for them to work during evenings, but they don't expect others to. So I wish that we had that in the survey as well, because then you could see that even though they say that, if they themselves do it, they have kind of these implicit rules. So yeah.
See, Tyler's hand is up, and then we can come to David and Steve.
I've done some work in the past on sort of this erasure of barriers between work and life, how it relates to creative laborers. And my question kind of relates on that, because you touch really and focus on technology, but there's a lot of theoretical work that's been done around immaterial labor and the switch to what people call the social factory, which is this idea that given that the product of labor has changed increasingly to include stuff like graphic design and those sorts of things, that those switches in themselves make the boundaries of work and life more porous. So I'm wondering if you're and there's Boltanski and Chiapello come at it from a different angle, which is that work has become more creative, and through integrating that creativity into work, those boundaries between work and life automatically sort of erase. And so here I'm thinking it specifically around your discussion on teachers and how they run into people. And also you mentioned unconscious work, which kind of made me think about work I've done on graphic designers where, they might come up with an idea outside of the boundaries of work just because the nature of that work itself is creative. So you can't really put a boundary on there. So I guess a long-winded way to ask a question would be, have you thought of how that interjects into these conversations around boundaries?
Yeah. Thank you. I'm not that familiar with the creative profession, so that's really interesting that you say. But we do write about this in the Patterns and Perceptions article about the professional logics. It's teachers and lawyers and how it's not a job, it's a profession. It's not like you go home from work and then you stop being that. But it's also part of identity and source of meaning, yeah, and so that to have that continuity in the relation to clients or people, so has meaning in itself, and that also erases the boundaries. But then we see that technology increases that, and it makes it that continuity in relationships, for example, makes that possible, and they do it more because of this professional logic, or the lights go off every night.
They want us to go home.
Yes. So we see that it's technology, professional logic, and also the ideal of involved parenthood, that you should be always present for your children. Yeah.
David, you want to ask a question?
Thank you, Julia, and thank you, Tanja and Wendy, for. It's so late that the lights already went off in Oslo. I have a comment about the right to disconnect. I don't know if you're aware, but there are other nations outside the Western European Australia that have this type of laws. I'm from Colombia, and in 2023, Colombia enacted one of these laws, the right to disconnect. But enforcement is I don't know how it's enforced, because first there are so many exceptions of who can be exempt. Managers, for instance, are exempt. Safety committees, obviously, they're also exempt. But I'm just curious about this interplay between a regulatory framework, like a right to disconnect, and organizational policies and norms that really, so what are your thoughts on this interplay between the rules and the norms?
Yes. I think that in the short answer would be that it's quite unrealistic that a law right to disconnect without practical implication in an organization that endorses connectivity. But we see that, for example, in France, the way the work on implementation is not done properly. It's up to the organization. They have to find ways to do it, and it's not so the link between the formal law and practice in workplace is not really considered properly.
And I think it seems the French law doesn't seem like more a suggestion that you should do collaboration with the unions and suggest something. But if you don't do that, you can do like a charter or guidelines. So like maybe it if it ticks off yes, that you just do some, okay, people, we encourage people to log off or we won't be angry at you, and then they don't enforce it and the managers keep going on working like they do, or some workers do that, then it seems, I think I was surprised when I saw the content of the law. So but I don't know how it looks like in the other countries, if it's more strict or more
No, but it's not
implemented or
yeah, because it's a right also that it's it's not an obligation to disconnect. It's a right to say no. But like we saw in that teacher survey, which we presented a number, very few managers explicitly show that they like react negatively if you're disconnecting. So it's not really. I mean, here we don't have that right, but it's not a matter of employers not allowing people to log off if they ask to. It's more, yeah, the implicit consequences of it.
I think something has to do with the norms. If you put the law into place, you also have to work on changing the norms and do like on all levels in an organization.
But also in the Reflex project, the idea is to, like, the starting point is that laws are implemented in a work context, and that in the discussions of the right to disconnect, we tend to forget that work context. And so we use teachers and schools as a case to explore like pros and cons of connectivity and like what, how can we try to facilitate flexible work hours in a way that supports the actual needs of the employees and employers in that context.
And then also for the teachers, it's about work demands. Like they don't feel that they, but also so many of the people that we interviewed said that they couldn't, that they worked inefficiently, that they felt that they had to work extra because they were more inefficient than everyone else. And then suddenly if a lot of people say that, then it's more about the demands, not the choice. And I don't know what happens then with the right to disconnect. If people have the right to disconnect, but nobody can do it because everyone has too much to do. And something has to do on to be done on the structural level with how much extra demands can you put on teachers every year.
And I remember in a different project, I interviewed managers about work hour regulations. And the police prosecutors in Norway, they have strictly regulated work hours. And in some police districts, they clock in and out and they're not allowed overtime. But if you have a case the day after, they would clock out and they would go back into the office and continue working. And it wasn't, I mean, the managers said that they had hundreds of unregistered overtime hours every month, which was not something they wanted. But then again, if it's you're going to court, it's up to you. You don't want to show up unprepared. And I think that applies to the right to disconnect as well.
Thank you so much. I know we are already over time here and it is late there, so we don't want to keep you any later outside of your normal work hours. So just want to thank you so much for this presentation. This was really interesting, really engaging, and it's great to see you both.
Thanks.
Thank
for having
you so
us.
much.
Thank you.
Have a nice day.
Thank you.